how are you doing?
Hey there, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. I hope you're doing well too. What's on your mind today?
Thank you so much. So can we discuss negotiation skills today?
Absolutely.
Oh, thanks a lot. So today I'd like to focus on some of the major negotiation techniques. So first thing first, should we talk about the anchoring, which is a major technique for negotiation. So should we propose the terms and conditions in the contract negotiation from our end, or let the counterparty to do that? What do you think from the anchoring technique perspectives?
Oh, great topic. Yeah, anchoring is definitely one of those classic negotiation techniques that can really shape the whole discussion. So, in general, from an anchoring perspective, the idea is that the person who makes the first offer can often set the tone or the reference point for the negotiation. So, if you feel confident and you have a solid idea of what you want, it can be a good move to go ahead and put your term out there first, because then you're anchoring the discussion around your starting point. On the other hand, if you're not quite sure about the range, or you'd rather let the other party reveal their cards first, you can let them anchor, and then you can adjust accordingly. It really depends on how prepared and confident you feel in setting that first benchmark. But yeah, anchoring can definitely give you a bit of an advantage if you do it thoughtfully.
Okay, thank you so much. So, what do you think about the situation where we have some kind of idea on the draft contract on our end? Then, in that case, or should we just give our counterparty our draft agreement, or should we discuss something in advance? What do you think? So, how should we proceed?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you already have a draft contract or a draft agreement ready, that can actually be a pretty strong starting point. It's kind of like you're giving them a framework that you've put together, and it sets a reference for the conversation. In many cases, sharing your draft agreement can actually be a really efficient way to proceed because you're putting your cards on the table and you're saying, hey, here's what we're thinking. Let's work from this. Of course, the flip side is you want to make sure that you're not anchoring in a way that maybe puts you at a disadvantage. So you want to have a reasonable draft, something that's not too extreme, but something that represents your interests well. And then you can let the other party come back with their thoughts. So in short, if you have a draft ready, it's often a good idea to share it because it gives you a starting point and it can streamline the whole negotiation process.
Yeah, I do agree, but I think so sometimes there may be some discrepancy on the idea what kind of contract should we make. Say for example, so if in the case so typical case would be that so we would like to negotiate some sale and purchase agreement, but the other party thinks about the different type of contract. Then in that case, if we just propose the sale and purchase agreement, then definitely that would cause a problem. And the counterparty may think that so we are very much remote and we should talk, or sometimes our counterparty just propose us some different idea. Say, for example, just sharing with us their draft contract rather than reviewing the contract draft that we shared. So what do you think? So in that though, in the situation where our counterparty's idea or plans for the potential transaction is not clear, then would that help for us to just sharing with them the contract, draft contract? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good nuance to bring up, and it definitely happens in real negotiations. If you're not entirely sure what the other party has in mind, or if you think there's a chance they're picturing a completely different type of agreement, it can be a little tricky to just hand over your draft and say, here you go, because you don't want to create confusion or signal that you're not on the same page. In that kind of scenario, it might actually help to have a preliminary conversation first. You could say something like, hey, before we share a full draft, let's make sure we're aligned on the type of agreement we're aiming for. Just a quick chat to clarify what kind of contract structure they're expecting can save both sides time. And if it turns out that they have a totally different idea, then you can either ask them to share their draft first, or you can adjust your draft before you send it over. So yeah, a little bit of upfront discussion can definitely help. Make sure you're not just throwing something out there that feels out of sync.
I do agree. So if there's any significant discrepancy between the parties to the agreement, then definitely. So if we just share the agreement, draft agreement, and if we think that that would be kind of anchoring, but there may be the situation where the counterparty just provide us with their draft contract and they may be thinking that that is the anchoring. So I think so, and that's not really great. So as you mentioned, I agree that uh, to have a preliminary conversation before sharing the draft agreement may help in some situations. And I think that would be very much possible when in the situation where we use a different language. Say, for example, so their language is Japanese. So their mother tongue is Japanese, while our mother tongue is English. Then in that case, so that would cause that kind of a problem very often from my experience. So I do agree that preliminary discussion can help in some situation. So yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned in the very beginning, I do agree that if we do have some idea, some clear or concrete idea on the transaction we will be making, then definitely proposing some kind of terms and conditions, say for example, pricing or draft contract may help, but otherwise, I think that proposing some kind of terms and condition from our end isn't that does not really help us from the anchoring perspective. So thank you so much. So let's move on to the second technique, which is a best alternative to negotiated agreement, which is also the very typical negotiation skills. So can you briefly, first of all, explain what the best alternative to negotiated agreement means?
Absolutely. Let's dive into that. So, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or BATNA for short, is basically your backup plan. It's what you can turn to if the current negotiation doesn't work out. In other words, your BATNA is the best course of action you can take if you can't reach the deal you want in this particular negotiation. So, why is it important? Well, knowing a BATNA gives you leverage. If you have a strong alternative waiting in the wings, you won't feel pressured to accept a bad deal because you know you have another option. On the other hand, if you don't have a good BATNA, you might be more flexible or creative in finding a compromise. In short, BATNA is just about knowing your plan B so you can negotiate with confidence.
Yeah, of course. And I think so BATNA helps us to identify the walkaway point as well. So if our supplier says that, so they can just offer the, to say for example, so 10 million JPY, but it's clear that we can buy the same product from another supplier less than 10 million JPYs, and definitely that would be the walkaway point. Is my understanding correct?
Yep, you've got it exactly right. That's a perfect example of how BATNA helps you define your walkaway point. If you know you can get the same product for a better price elsewhere, then you know exactly when to walk away from the negotiation if the supplier won't meet your terms. It gives you that clarity and confidence because you're not negotiating in the dark. You know what your fallback is. So yeah, that's a spot on understanding, and having that BATNA in mind really strengthens your position.
And so I think that in the research of the negotiation, there are so many discussions on this BATNA negotiation technique, and which is very much complicated and difficult. But let's just in this discussion focus on the some basic matters. So first of all, so should we reveal our BATNA to our counterparty when we are negotiating some transactions?
Yeah, definitely a great point to keep it simple and focus on the basics. So, when it comes to whether or not you should reveal your BATNA to the other party, the general advice is usually not to show your hand too early. In most cases, you want to keep your BATNA to yourself because it's part of your own strategic advantage. If the other party knows exactly what your alternative is, they might try to undermine it or use it to their advantage. Of course, there are exceptions. Sometimes, if revealing a strong BATNA can encourage them to offer you a better deal up front, because they realize you have a solid alternative, it might be useful in a very tactical way. But as a rule of thumb, it's usually best to keep that information in your back pocket and just use it to guide your own decisions rather than putting it all on the table.
Yeah, I do agree. And sometimes I think that we are incentivized to bluff about our partner, so that we can have a more and more bargaining power in the negotiation. So, what do you think about those kind of situations? So, should we bluff about our partner? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really interesting ethical and strategic question that comes up a lot in negotiation discussions. So, from a purely theoretical standpoint, some negotiators do think about bluffing as a tactic to try to gain leverage. But the tricky part is that bluffing can backfire if the other party catches on, or if they find out that your BATNA isn't really what you claimed it was. That can hurt trust and damage the relationship, which can be important for future negotiations or just your reputation in general. So generally, it's a good idea to be as honest as possible. You don't have to reveal everything, and you can keep your BATNA private, but relying on a bluff can be risky. If you do decide to hint at a strong alternative, it's usually better if it's at least somewhat grounded in reality. That way you keep your credibility intact and maintain a good working relationship. So yeah, I'd say honesty tends to be the best policy in the long run.
Okay, yeah, I do agree. So, trust is really important to develop the respectful relationship and also do a successful transaction. So, can you briefly explain what the zone of possible agreement is?
Absolutely. So the zone of possible agreement, often shortened to ZOPA, is basically the range or the overlap between the minimum terms that one party is willing to accept and the maximum terms the other party is willing to offer. In other words, it's that sweet spot where both sides can find common ground and actually make a deal. So if you imagine that each party has a certain range of acceptable outcomes, like a buyer's maximum price and a seller's minimum price, ZOPA is where those ranges overlap. If there's no overlap at all, then there's no deal to be made unless someone changes their position. But if there is an overlap, then you found a potential zone where an agreement can happen. So it's a really useful concept because it helps you figure out if a deal is even possible and where you might both be able to land.
Okay, thank you so much. And so, you mentioned just earlier that it would not just great for us to review our partner to the counterparty. So in that case, so counterparty is always the same as us. Which means that a counterparty may not reveal their partner to us. Then in that case, so how can we know our counterparty's partner and know the zone of possible agreement in that case if the counterparty doesn't really share with us their partner?
Yeah, that's definitely the art of negotiation, right? Since both sides usually keep their BATNA private, you often have to do a little bit of detective work and read between the lines. One way to get a sense of their BATNA, or at least their limits, is by paying attention to how they negotiate and what they'll push back on. For example, if they're really firm on a certain price or a certain term, that might give you clues about where their boundaries are. Also, sometimes you can gather information from market research or industry standards. If you know what's typical in your field, you can make some educated guesses about what their alternatives might be. And as for the zone of possible agreement, you kind of figure it out through the negotiation process itself by testing proposals and seeing how they respond. You gradually get a feel for where that overlap might be. So it's a bit of a dance, but over time, you can piece together a picture of where the common ground lies.
I do agree, but it's really difficult for us to find out what's the partner for our counterparty is because we have to make a lot of conversation to detect that. I think so. Sometimes even talking with them or even having a casual conversation with them can be a little difficult. And sometimes we can just exchange a draft contract or any in that situation, so we are really not that dynamic. What should we do to get the discussion or negotiation and more dynamic? So should we just solicit them to a conversation or meetings or something? If we are just doing some kind of contract negotiation on an email or something. So how should we change the environment or culture of the negotiation?
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. It can be tough when the negotiation feels a bit static or you're just exchanging emails and documents and you don't get that dynamic back and forth that helps you read between the lines. Sometimes it really does help to change the format a bit, like suggesting a quick call or a video meeting can add a little more human element into the mix. That way you can pick up on tone or ask clarifying questions more easily and just build a bit more rapport. Of course, it's not always possible if the other side is more formal or they prefer to keep things in writing, but even suggesting a short alignment call can sometimes open up the conversation. And if not, you can still ask open-ended questions in emails to gently encourage a bit of a dialogue. But yeah, a little shift in how you communicate can sometimes make the negotiation feel a bit more dynamic and give you more insight into their perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. I do agree. So let's move on to the other points. So first of all, can we discuss the multiple offers? Which is called MESO. So should we make multiple offer at one time or stick to one offer? This technique is called multiple equivalent simultaneous offers, which is very typical negotiation skills. So, what is that? And how does this help? Can you briefly explain?
Yeah, absolutely. So MESO, or multiple equivalent simultaneous offers, is a really neat negotiation technique. It basically means that instead of just giving one single offer to the other party, you give them a few different options all at once. Each of these options is equally valuable to you, but they might differ in terms of the specific details. Like one might have a slightly higher price, but a longer delivery time, while another might be faster, but a bit more expensive. The key is that you'd be happy with any of these options. The advantage of using mesos is that it gives the other party a sense of control and flexibility. They get to pick which option works best for them, and in the process, you also learn a bit more about their preferences or priorities. Plus, it shows that you're flexible and willing to collaborate, which can build goodwill. So, in short, mesos can help move the negotiation forward by giving both sides more to talk about and making it easier to find a win-win solution.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. So sometimes I understand that offer consists of some kind of packages. So say for example, multiple terms and conditions, which include terms and also other terms and conditions like reps and warranties or compensation or something like that. And so as a package, so we're going to be making some kind of multiple offers, which consists of the some different terms and conditions, and then we will be making several offers. So then in that case, they can just our counterparties may make some choices over those several types of the offers. Then we can just make a dynamic conversation. So is my understanding correct?
Yeah, you're spot on. That's exactly the idea. By creating multiple offers as a kind of package deal, each with a different mix of terms and conditions, you're making it easier for the other side to pick the combination that works best for them. And that naturally leads to a more dynamic conversation because instead of just going back and forth on a single set of terms, you're exploring multiple scenarios at once. It also shows that you're being collaborative and that you respect their ability to choose what fits them best. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. That approach can make the whole negotiation feel more fluid and constructive, and it can help both sides find a solution more efficiently.
Yeah, of course, but I think for in some cases, I think it would be very much difficult because that would be too much. That would take too much time to prepare several offers at one time, which consists of different terms and negotiation. So sometimes we're gonna have some authority kind of matters, kind of problems under the internal policies of the company. Then in that case, to see, for example, before proposing something to counterparties, we're going to be having some approval from the relevant functions internally. Then in that case, if we have to prepare several package of offers and also having the relevant approval from the relevant functions internally, then definitely that's gonna take too much time, and also that's gonna need more and more internal explanation, and that would take too much time, and that may be too much complicated, and sometimes that's gonna be a little that's gonna kind of cause some confusion internally. And then, take for example, there may be some miscalculation or errors or something, and as I think so. And if we just leave the errors as they are, and they just share our offer with the counterparty, so that's going to be a little bit risky. So what do you think about the risk of the MESO?
Yeah, that's a very fair point, and I think you're absolutely right to consider the practical side of things. Mesos do add a layer of complexity, and they can take more time and more internal coordination, especially if you need approvals from different departments or you have to explain why you're presenting multiple offers. And yeah, anytime you add complexity, there's always that risk of errors or miscommunications creeping in. So I think the key is to weigh the benefits against the practical challenges. If you feel like using Mesos will really help move the negotiation forward and is worth the extra effort, then it can be a great tool. But if it's going to create more internal hurdles or confusion than it's worth, then it's perfectly fine to keep it simpler and focus on one offer at a time. Ultimately, it's all about choosing the strategy that fits best with your organization's workflow and the specific negotiation you're dealing with.
Yeah, I agree. So if we are talking about some simple transaction, then and if we have some flexibility on the terms and conditions for the deal, and it's definitely so we can just rely on the MESO technique to make the negotiation process more and more simple. So and then I think that would make sense. So can we move to the other technique, which is called Logrolling? And I think that may be a little similar concept with the MESO, but exactly different from the MESO. So can you briefly explain what the Logrolling is, and also difference between the MESO and Logrolling?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into that. Log rolling is indeed a little bit different from mesos, even though they both involve being flexible with different terms. So log rolling is basically a technique where you trade off issues that are important to each party. In other words, you might give the other side something that's really valuable to them on one issue, and in return, they give you something that's really valuable to you on another issue. For example, maybe you're more flexible on delivery dates, and they're more flexible on price. So you trade those off to reach a mutually beneficial agreement. Now, the difference from mesos is that with mesos, you're presenting multiple offers at the same time and letting them choose among them. With log rolling, it's more about the give and take on different issues throughout the negotiation. You're identifying which terms matter most to each side, and then trading concessions in a way that both parties feel like they've won on the things that are most important to them. So while mesos are about offering multiple packages at once, log rolling is more about making strategic trade-offs on individual issues as you go. Both are great techniques, and they can definitely complement each other in negotiation.
Yes, thank you so much. I do agree. Thank you so much for your explanation. And so lastly, so it may be a little bit more and more administrative or housekeeping matters, I think, but so it would be also important in the negotiation. So my question here, so should we negotiate the negotiation process as well? So not just about the terms and conditions. Say, for example, so when to have a meeting, or when to have a when to exchange a draft contract or something like that. So those kind of administrative matters, because so sometimes our counterparty do raise some issues on the who should participate in the negotiation meetings or something like that. And so, but I think so negotiation is some kind of problem over the authority and also expertise or something like that. So that should be controlled internally, not by the counterparty. So is my understanding correct? And so how should we keep the things more efficient?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're touching on something really important here. In a lot of negotiations, it's not just about the terms of the deal itself, but also about the process of how you negotiate. And you're right that it can sometimes be really helpful to have a conversation up front about those administrative or procedural points. So that might mean agreeing on who should be involved in which meetings, how often you'll meet, what the timeline looks like, and how you'll share drafts or other documents. And you're also right that you want to keep control over your own internal decision making. So if the other party is pushing for certain procedural things that don't work for you, it's totally reasonable to explain how you prefer to handle it internally. Basically, you can negotiate the process just like you negotiate the substance. Set some ground rules that make things run smoothly and keep everyone on the same page. That can actually help the negotiation be more efficient and avoid confusion down the line. So yeah, you're definitely on the right track.
Okay, thank you so much. So that's it for today's conversation. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I'm really glad we could dive into all these negotiation techniques. If you ever want to chat more, just let me know. Otherwise, have a great day and good luck with all your negotiations.
You too. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye and take care.